Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Goaltending, where your why is bigger than your excuses. We're back for part two with Ryan Gottfredson, an extremely successful author, has written 3 books at this point: Success Mindsets, The Elevated Leader, and his most recent book that's about to come out in June, Becoming Better. We had an excellent conversation in part one that goes through becoming better. We get into mindsets. We get into that understanding where you are elevation wise and how to vertically develop. Make sure you all go check that out. Now on this part, we're going to get into the actual process of writing a book. A lot of people, have a story to share and either don't know what it looks like to write a book, or they're scared of the process, or like scared of failing. And so they either put it off for way longer than they need to, or they never do it at all. And so I thought it'd be awesome to just gain some insight from your experience going through writing 3 books, to talk about some common questions that people might have, to help them overcome some of that initial fear, some of that lack of knowledge that could help them get started on their journey toward that.
Would love to do that. Will, as we're stepping into this, one of the things that I hope it helps people who feel called to write a book. I also hope that it prevents people from writing a book if they don't feel called to write a book. Because what I've learned, and I'll be honest, right, this authorship is a really hard road, and it is becoming increasingly difficult. So I think we could help people steer them towards writing a book if they feel called to do it. I also think we can help and add a lot of value to people to prevent some people from writing some books, because there's just some calculation that goes involved. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation, and just as a whole, helping people who are trying to figure out how to navigate in this space.
That's a really great point, because it's like definitely not for everybody. So gaining some awareness of, is this even the right path for me? Is this really something I want to take on, and can add value in doing so? So, I mean, where did it start? I guess if you think back to you're writing your first book, where's the idea come from? And then what's it look like in terms of taking that idea and like, all right, let's get started?
Yeah. So, I'm going to take you back to high school. So in high school, I took a class that I'm not sure is offered in any other high school. I guess it is, but it's not very common. But the class was sports psychology. And I grew up as an athlete. I was a basketball player. And as part of this class, I had to read 3 books. And I got to choose the books. And they had to be related to sports and sports psychology. And so I chose 3 books by basketball coaches. I read a book by Pat Riley, Mike Krzyzewski, and then Rick Majerus. So those are the 3 books that I read. And I remember just loving those books. And I remember as a senior in high school thinking, man, if I could write books like this for my career, that would be my dream. But I didn't even know how to do that, what to do. And so I just kind of put that in the back of my mind. Well, fast forward then, 15 years later, we talked about this in our previous podcast, but I was a professor at Cal State Fullerton and I was there for 2 years. And then I took a leave of absence to work at Gallup and be a consultant. And I was thinking that would be a long-term career shift. But after about 10 months on the job, I got fired. And so I'm thinking, what the heck am I going to do with my future now? Well, because I had taken a leave of absence from Cal State Fullerton, it was just easy for me to go back to Cal State Fullerton, which is what I did. But I kind of just realized if I'm going to make this transition back, I've got to change how I operate. I got to do this in a way that is more meaningful to me. And so what I decided to do is I decided to be more entrepreneurial. Yeah, I'm going to still stay being a professor, but I wanted to see my work, my research have an immediate impact on leaders and on organizations. And so I knew I wanted to do consulting work. If I wasn't going to be with Gallup, well, maybe I need to do this on my own. Became part of my thinking. So So I decided to start up my own consulting business. And as I'm thinking about, well, how do I start making money as somebody who's just a no-namer? How do I even start getting known in the marketplace? Well, one idea that came up for me was to write a book, right? I just kind of know I've wanted to learn from and hire people who have written books. That's how I get introduced to people. So I was thinking, well, maybe I need to write a book. Well, at that same time, I was doing research on mindsets, and I just found it to be so eye-opening, groundbreaking for me at least. And I just kind of sensed I've got an idea here that I think that the public could benefit from. And I think it would be a good way for me to kind of position myself in terms of being a consultant as a mindset expert. And so I decided to take on the effort of writing a book on mindsets as a way to kind of put my stamp on the consulting world in a way, and to start my business. So that's where I would say the desire started. Do you want to unpack any of that?
Yeah, no, I like that. So, I mean, that I feel like that really dives into the like the why, like understanding like why we got started and wanting to write it. So, what's the next steps look like? What is the action from there?
Yeah. So, I'm kind of sitting there and I come up with this idea. Well, I'm going to write a book. And now I'm thinking, well, how the heck do I write a book? So what I
There it
did, and
is.
in fact, I'll encourage this of anybody. So I'm going to point people to some resources. But and when I wrote Success Mindset, so I started that process back in probably 2017, 2018, right there around that time. So that was almost 10 years ago. That's crazy to say, but right. And there's a lot more resources available now than there was then. And so what I decided is I was going to find kind of like a writer's workshop. And I found a writer's workshop that was conducted through a publisher called Hay House. So many people may be familiar with Hay House. And so I signed up for an online writer's workshop. At the time, it was like $500. And I just loved that writer's workshop because it introduced me to the authorship world, what the publishing world. They talked about, how do you write a book? What does the publishing world look like? Well, you've got these self-publishing on one side, and you've got traditional publishing on the other, and you've got a whole big mix in the middle called hybrid publishing. And so I got to learn about all the differences in the publishing industry. I've got to learn, facts, and this speaks to why I said what I did at the beginning is I think the statistics are something like 90% of books don't sell more than 1,000 copies. And it's like, wow, right?
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, well, how do you become part of the 10% or even the 1%, right? That are selling millions of copies. And so that was game changing for me, was to go to the writer's workshop. The other thing as a part of this, right there when I'm trying to figure this out, is there was a local writers conference that came up. I live in Orange County, California. So there's a writers conference. I came across an ad for that, and it was just about a half an hour away from where I live. And I sign up and I show up, and the guy who runs the conference is like the nicest guy on the planet. He's there greeting everybody, and he sees me and he can kind of tell, like, this guy's a newbie. So he pulls me off to the side, and he kind of in the corner, and he's kind of like, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? I'm in the corner and he's this big dude, and I'm thinking, oh gee. And he's like, okay, I'm going to teach you the number one lesson of being an author. I was like, yes, please. This is why I came. And he says, almost all authors spend more money on their book than what they make from it. And he says, if you're going to take this journey, you've got to be okay with that. Right. And so we talked it through, and he's just like, from book sales. And this is where some of these statistics come from. 90% of authors don't sell more than $1,000. Look, and if you're making, let's just say $2 to $3 a book, to make, If you sell $1,000, you're only making $2,000 to $3,000 in the lifetime of the book. Well, to get a book into the world and to do a good job with it, what I've come to learn is that you probably need to spend at a minimum $50,000. And if, I mean, there's people like, unfortunately, this is the ugly side of the authorship world. If you want to hit the New York Times bestseller list as a first-time author, you need to spend $300,000.
Ooh.
It's crazy.
All right.
And even if you spend $300,000 to hit the New York Times bestseller list, that probably only means that you've sold like 2,500 copies of the book within a month.
Wow.
And you don't know if that's going to snowball into more and more copies or if it's going to die. Yeah. Right? So if you're only selling 2,500 copies of a book, you're making, let's just say, $4 a pop. Well, now you made $10,000, but you also spent $300,000. Yeah. So when I talk to this guy, I mean, you got to figure out, here's a couple of other things I learned. Most authors don't make money from selling their books. They make money from, usually, if it's nonfiction, from consulting or speaking. So if you want to be a successful author, you've got to have consulting or speaking. Well, I'm not going to say you've got to. You
probably should.
That's an ideal business model, right? The other thing that I learned at that writer's workshop is I went to this session and there was a fiction author. And she was somebody I'd never heard of, but she had published something like 16 books. So she had pumped out a lot of books. And what she said to us was, I didn't start making money, essentially full-time money, which she said was about $80,000 a year. I didn't start making $80,000 a year from the sale of my books until my 8th book. So it's kind of, the point that she was trying to make is, if you want to be successful selling books, you got to pump out a lot of books. And every book, your platform just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's a term that any author or aspiring author needs to get familiar with, platform. Because what dictates the success of the book is the size of your platform. Now, what is a platform? It's essentially your following. That could be on social media, that can be an email list, or it could be your network in a way. And one of the things that I've learned is that traditional publishers won't even sniff a book unless you have an email list of at least 10,000 people. And that's not easy to build. So these are some of the, I guess I'm talking doom and gloom in many ways, which I'm recognizing, but in a way it's to, recognize some of the realities of the authorship world, and it's not pretty, unfortunately. So, that's why I say, and I'll let you interject on any follow-up questions you have, but that, for me, I kind of tell people, unless you feel called to write a book, I would figure out a different way to impact the world. In which there is ample ways beyond a book.
Oh yeah, that information right there is gold. Like, I mean, that is, if you have ever thought about a book, I feel like you can listen to that piece right there and decide, like, is this the right journey for me? Am I willing to take these things on? Am I going into it with the right intent as well? So one of the pieces in there is all of the different ways to potentially publish your book, to put it out to the world. How did you decide between traditional publishing, self-publishing, or that mix in between? And what do you think a good approach to kind of dealing with that decision is?
Yeah, well, unless your name is Prince Harry, you're probably not going to get picked up by a traditional publisher, right? Yeah. I'm not saying it's impossible, but so unless you're a big name or unless you have a massive email list, you're probably not going to be picked up by a traditional publisher. So that leaves essentially two options. You could self-publish, or you could go the hybrid route. Now, the hybrid route, there's a very wide spectrum of hybrid publishing. So there's towards the self-publishing route, there's these hybrid publishers that essentially just help you to self-publish. And they've got some processes and systems that could kind of streamline that for you, where you don't have to be an expert in how to create a book. You could essentially hire them to play your advisor in that process. So that's really close to the self-publishing route. On the other side, it's closer to the traditional publishing. So these types of hybrid publishers essentially operate as a traditional publisher, but they really don't pay you an upfront kind of advance, and you enter into an agreement to purchase a certain number of copies of the book or pay a certain fee to work with them. And then they essentially operate from there as a traditional publisher. So my books have been published with hybrid publishers that are more towards the traditional publishing side of things. I've worked with two publishers. My first publisher is Morgan James. Had a really good experience with them. Nothing really negative. But then my new book is being published with Page Two. And really the only reason why I went with a new publisher was because Page Two is a little bit better known in the marketplace. And so the closer you are to traditional publishing, just in general, the more respected the book, it's easier for that book to be respected by the general public. If we self-publish, it's just a harder lift to be respected in the marketplace. I mean, there's a lot of big name people, like I think Seth Godin, for example. I think he self-publishes all his books now. Well, he can and be successful because he's Seth Godin. And of course, the closer you are to traditional publishing, the less of a royalty that you get from a book sold. So you take a smaller cut. And then the closer you are to self-publishing, the larger cut that you take per book sold.
Okay. That's good to know. Very good information. When you are, I think like time is a big factor as well. And the time that you are able to commit in consistency in writing. So kind of for your journey specifically, and this may look a little bit different for multiple people. I've had other authors on the show kind of talk about what their process ended up being, but from start to finish, about how long do you spend on a book, and what does that look like in terms of the time commitment you spend in writing and then everything else at the end to get it published?
Well, with all three of my books, I never had a deadline for myself. I had an idea and I wanted to pump out the book, but I never had a deadline. But what I would do is essentially I would have writing time every weekday. So for me, it was every weekday, essentially between 5:30 and 7 or 7:30. That was my writing time. So every day I would write during that time. When it kind of hit being done, I was done for the day. Mm-hmm. And so I would take as long as it took to get the book written. And what I found is that doing it that way, it generally takes me, with all three books, about a year to put together the first draft. And then it's about another year to go through the editing process and then to get published. And then you could add a couple more months onto that potentially depending on the book. So that's kind of been, as a whole, my general writing strategy. Do you want to ask any questions there? Because I could even break that down a little bit further. But
yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind for me, like usually when I talk about goals, I'm like, you need to set a date. But I almost think of writing a book like as an art almost. Like it's not necessarily. So I like that concept of maybe not having a date, because then you're able to, if you're just consistently giving it time, you're able to continue to hone and craft that product to whatever you envision without like a deadline hanging over your head. So I like that. And so it sounds like hour and a half ish a day on weekdays, working toward about a year on the draft. Then what's your process look like beyond that for like editing, review. It was really cool to see a piece of like getting input from other people on this last book and getting to be a part of that for you. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start closer to the beginning, and then I'll kind of walk through some of those steps that are a little bit later on. So, on the front end, and I encourage this of everybody, whether you need one or not, I encourage any author to write a book proposal. Now, a book proposal is generally what you will send to a publisher, whether hybrid or traditional. But a book proposal forces you to flesh out essentially kind of the why, the outline, and they generally include a couple of example chapters. And so going through the book proposal process, to me, is essential for laying the foundation for your writing journey. And at times I have hired coaches to help me go through that process, particularly around outlining the book. I've just found it really helpful to be able to kind of bounce ideas off of experienced writers as a part of that process. So to me, there's about a 2-month process of laying that foundation and putting together that proposal. Once that proposal is put together and I've got this clear kind of outline and framework for the direction I'm going to go with the book, then I'm going to start writing. And it usually takes from there about 10-ish months to write the first draft of the book. The first draft is just that. It is a first draft, and it's a sign that you're maybe halfway done with the process. Because after that, then you send in your first draft. You're going to go through content editing. So you're going to have a content editor that essentially says they're going to help you tell you what works, what doesn't work, what it needs to be removed, what needs to be added, what chapters need to be adjusted. Do you need to shift up kind of your outline of the book? And it's a major overhaul. Any book, if you're not doing a major overhaul at that point in time, you kind of did it wrong, or you're doing the editing process wrong. So there's an initial content edit, and then there's generally, I would say 2 to 4 more of those content edits. And that process can take anywhere from, if you're working steady at it, just the way that I did, anywhere from 4 to 8+ months to go through that content edit process. Yeah. So that's where it was going. It was right in the middle of that content edit process that I sent out some kind of early drafts of the first part of my book. And that's where you and others served as some readers and got some feedback at that stage, where I'm still doing some pretty major overhauls to the book. So that's the content edit process. And then you move into a series of essentially proofreading efforts. You essentially say the content and the structure is what it is, and I'm moving forward, and now it's fine tuning. And you go through a series of proofreading and then steps to put the book in the format in which publishers will use it to create the physical books, the ebooks, etc. And then it's at that point in time, you generally record the audiobook if you're going to do that.
All right. I mean, I feel like that's got to be one of the most like down and dirty, like this is what you need to know about books from beginning to end. That we really just hit a ton of great pieces. And man, that information is so useful for anybody thinking about approaching the process. Is there, like, if you could go back and give a piece of advice to a younger version of yourself before starting writing the book, when it comes to like getting into this process, what would it be?
Oh, man. Well, here's one thing that comes to mind, and I've just learned this along the way. Let me point out, I'm going to say that there's 2 must-read books for any aspiring author. One book is called Platform by Michael Hyatt, and the other book is called Write a Must-Read by A.J. Harper. So those I think are must reads. There's probably other books in that space, but I found those two to be essential for
Mhm.
kind of learning the authorship process, from both publishing, which is more platform, to writing the book, which is more the how to write a must, or sorry, it's called Write a Must Read, by AJ Harper. So those are two books, and I just wish maybe I had read those a little bit earlier. I
Yeah.
think, look, it's a scary venture to write a book because of the amount that I feel like you need to invest in a book for it to be commercially successful. As I
Mhm.
mentioned, I think it's at least 50 grand, um, to write a book. And you just never know if you're going to get that money back in some form or capacity. And so
Right.
it's really scary to put down a lot of money not knowing if it's going to return. And so I think along with this, you're kind of, one, it's a leap of faith. And maybe I'm fortunate in that it has been an investment that has been worth my while.
Yeah.
But I also recognize that not all authors can say that. And so, I think it depends on the type of book that you're writing. Like, if you're writing, I can't speak much to the fiction side of things,
Yeah.
um, but I can on the nonfiction. But even then, like, I look at people who are writing memoirs, and I'm thinking, how do you make money on the back end of that? And I just don't know, right? I think being a speaker is one of those ways, but
Mhm.
it's I just imagine that memoir space is a really tough space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, let alone nonfiction. I mean, there's way more fiction books that are sold than nonfiction. And I've even learned for myself, writing success mindsets that was kind of more for everybody. That sold a lot better than the elevated leader because there's just a lot fewer leaders out there.
That's a good point.
Right. And so that shaped my strategy with my new book, Becoming Better. I wanted it to be a book that anybody could read, but also one that leaders could really benefit from.
Right.
So we'll see how it goes.
Man, that's a great point on strategy too. I appreciate you sharing that. This last piece, obviously, we want to highlight anything that you have going on coming up. I will make sure that there is a link to be able to access your books, Success Mindsets, The Elevated Leader, and the new one coming out in June, Becoming Better. What else do you have going on? Want to highlight any events, anything like that coming up?
Well, I hope, and here's what I've learned also as part of the authorship process, and I talk a lot about this in my book, Success Mindsets, is I think what got me to want to start my business and to write my book was I first started working on my mindsets. And I think that it ultimately, if you want to be successful as a writer, as an entrepreneur, uh, or in this space, I think it's wise for you to do some mindset work on the front end, because if you don't, I think we'll let our self protective fears get in our way, and that's a place where I could help people. Right, that's what I specialize in, helping people upgrade their mindsets so that they could transformationally elevate who they are, so that they could have a greater positive impact in their world.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what I'm passionate about. So if people want resources, self-assessments, things like that, go to my website, ryangottfredson.com. Check that out. And of course, would love to connect with anybody further.
Absolutely. I will drop the link. Make sure you all go check out the free assessments that he has. There's the mindset assessment, as well as the other one is your vertical
Vertical
development
development
assessment.
assessment. Yep.
Yeah. Make sure you all go actually check those out so you can build some awareness of where you're at in the journey. Ryan, thank you so much. Really, our time is our greatest asset, and for you to share your time today to offer insights from your book in part one, to offer your insights through your journey with writing, to help others in their journey, it means the world. So truly,
Well,
thank you.
thank you for your time. Running a podcast is not easy. It is very time consuming, and you are a saint for doing so and creating a space for people like me to share our ideas. So I really appreciate your service to the world too.
Thank you. I mean, where you talked about the passion on what you do, like this, to hear people talk about how they're touched by a guest or a comment or something that happened in the show, like that passion for seeing other people grow and gain value it means the world. So, hey, thank you all for tuning in and allowing us to be a part of your journey, to share our passions, to help you find and grow and be the best version of yourself to go after what you're going for in life. So make sure you all go like, subscribe, comment with your thoughts and questions to join the conversation, and let's grow.